this becomes law, no, I would be concerned about safety in the D.C. airspace. Absolutely not. I could not assure anybody.
A strong message from the chair of the NTSB after lawmakers in the House back a defense bill that she says would undo changes that were made to ensure flight safety.
The NTSB says it reverses safety measures that were put in place after that deadly mid-air collision of Flight 5322. Tonight, Dylan Domey hearing from lawmakers and the families of those victims involved about the risk this bill could present if it passes. Dylan?
Yeah, Mike, Rachel, next month marked 1 year since the deadly crash in Washington, D.C. And in the weeks and months after that collision, measures were taken to separate planes and helicopters in the D.C. airspace. But today, some lawmakers in the Senate, including Jerry Moran and Roger Marshall, say what's buried in the defense bill is problematic and fails to keep skies safer. A section of the Defense Authorization Act includes exceptions that allow military helicopters to fly in the D.C. airspace without ADS-B technology turned on. That technology shares the aircraft's real-time location with their aircraft. It was turned off when the Black Hawk helicopter collided with Flight 5342. Now, an amendment has been filed to strip those provisions and replace it with a bill recently introduced known as the Wheeler Act. That bill would require aircraft to have the technology and eliminate any loopholes for military helicopters.
There is fragility in the safety of our air system. And over the last year, Congress has passed significant legislation to invest in the future safety of our airspace and introduce legislation to make our airspace safer. Now is not the time to step back from these efforts.
Who is jamming this into a bill just because they think that DOD still deserves to fly in a crowded airspace without people knowing that they are there?
Now, tonight, the families of the crash victims are also pushing for changes to be made to the defense bill. In a statement, they say in part they want Congress to strengthen the bill by requiring real enforceable visibility standards for all military aircraft operating near civilian traffic. The families say the Rotor Act is a strong first step to ensure a tragedy like Flight 5342 never happens again. The bill will now head to the Senate, where it will be taken up for consideration. That's going to come up next